May I preach to you this morning in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Please be seated. One of the things I've come to learn as a young parent is that kids do a lot of the same things you did, but just technology changes how they do it. So, for example, all of us here have done some things that our parents probably looked at us and said, "Why did you do that?" You know, somebody dared you to do something, and you said, "I'm going to take that back." And if a double dog dared you, well, it was going to happen. But if you think about it, this part of this comes from our need to imitate other people. It comes from the need to fit in. And so when we see other people doing something and we want to be in the context of that group, we tend to pattern ourselves after that group. Now, social media, you might consider it a gift, you might consider it a bane on our existence, or somewhere in the middle. But it has revealed and exacerbated this trend of people following and mimicking other people. So, for those of you who don't know, there's a social media app called TikTok. And on this app, people will issue challenges. And my personal favorite, because some of these are just so weird and over the top, my personal favorite is one called the Milk Crate Challenge. Sounds pretty innocuous, until you realize that what the challenge is to stack a series of milk crates in a staircase pattern up and down about 7 feet in the air. And then the person accepting the challenge has to climb up and get back down. Usually, there is somebody holding a phone over here waiting to call 911. But before we get on this generation's case, let me just remind everyone in this room that previous generations did things like, how many people can you fit in a phone booth? And my personal favorite from the 1920s, singing on flagpoles. The fact that nobody laughed at that means we're a young congregation. But the idea of imitation goes back way, way further than we can possibly imagine. St. Paul, in his letter, says, imitate me as I imitate Christ. Now, Paul in this letter is not lifting himself up as the paragon of Christianity. It's actually quite the opposite. He's pointing to himself and saying, I'm a person who put all their faith in myself, who put all their faith in my title, and my entitlements, and my background, and my knowledge. And it didn't get me anywhere. I actually had to abandon all of it and accept Christ, and that's why I consider all those other things to be a waste. Gross is one of the words he uses. And so, Paul says, imitate me as I strive to imitate Christ. You know, last week, the image that I gave was of that house that burned to the ground. Now, when a person sits down to build a building, to build a house, they don't just walk up to the dirt with a stick, draw a box, draw a triangle for the roof, and say, make that. It's a little bit more complicated. And in St. Pete, a lot more permits. There is a plan. There's an architectural plan that you have to go through. A pattern that the constructors, the builders, and the contractors have to follow. And that's why there's somebody in a hard hat standing outside looking at the plans as it's happening to say, no, that doesn't go there, it goes over here. And what I want us to reflect on today is that this is very true of the spiritual life. Each of us has been called to model our lives after Christ, to model our lives after the life that Jesus lived in his example. There's a definite pattern. And we have to choose how close our lives are going to be to that pattern. Because it's very tempting for us to look at the life that Jesus lived and say, well, I like this part, but I prefer this over here. Or this looks good, but it doesn't quite fit what I need. And that is where things fall apart. Jesus modeled things like humility, self-sacrifice, prayer, and a dedication to being in relationship with God. His whole life, you can follow this pattern. And I'll give you an example. One of the things that Jesus does when he's overwhelmed, when he goes to go visit a city, and he sees all these people who are sick, he serves them, he heals them, he touches them, he prays with them, and then he gets tired. And one of the things you usually see in the Gospels after that, it'll say, and Jesus went off on his own to pray. That's a really good model for us. That when we're overwhelmed, if we've been doing ministry or helping others in or out of the church, to stop and go recharge our spiritual batteries. Now this is clearly pot calling kettle black, but that's why I'm preaching this morning, so I can account. And so Paul brings up this kind of dichotomy. He says we can model ourselves after Jesus Christ, or we can model ourselves after how other people are living in the context of the world. And what does he say? He says that those people are the enemies of the cross because they don't want to go anywhere near the cross. They want the reward that occurs right now in this world. And so Jesus models humility. And what does the world model so much for us but pride? Jesus models self-sacrifice. And what do we hear? The message is, you got to take care of yourself. Nobody's going to help you out in this world, so look out for number one. Jesus models a relationship with God. And the world says, okay, believe in God if you want, but it's really not a big deal. You can just kind of go through life without that. Or you can be hostile and completely reject it. As we go through Lent, I really want us to be thinking about this pattern. It may be a good spiritual exercise to do, is to take a walk around your house today, or your apartment, or wherever you live, and ask yourself this question, because I've asked it a couple of times in the houses that I've lived in, and said, why did they do it this way? Why do they have this wall here, or this bedroom over there? Just kind of ask yourself, put your mind in that mind of the architect, and then go back and think about the life that Jesus lived and say, why did he do it that way? Why did he teach this particular thing to the disciples? Why did he allow himself to endure this particular suffering when he knew it would lead to his death? And once we do, we start to climb into that mind and experience of Jesus. And I'm foreshadowing what we will do in just a few weeks. We will walk with Jesus and listen to his passion. And we will ask ourselves, why did it have to follow this plan? And the answer, of course, is our salvation. This is really the only way it could have been done. At the end, one of the things that we'll ask ourselves is, did I follow the plan? Did I conform my life to what Jesus asked me to do? In 1979, one of my favorite preachers, and you may remember him, he had his own radio show, TV show, Fulton Sheen. He was just one of those people who was bigger than life as a preacher and writer. It was one of the last sermons he ever gave. He was very old and very sick by this time. It was a Good Friday sermon. And he said that at the end of our lives, when we stand before Jesus, he will say, show me your hands. He will say, show me your hands, because he's going to show us his, and his have the wounds of the cross. And then he'll show us his side, and he'll have the wound from the spear. And he'll show us his head, and he'll have the wounds from the crown. And he'll ask us, show me your hands. Do they have some calluses and some wounds because of the giving that we've done? Are you a little beat up because you went against the grain of the world and said to love others, to care for others, to represent the faith of God? And my hope is that when we come to that moment before Christ, we'll gladly show our hands and say, yeah, I tried to follow the pattern. I tried to live into the example that you, Lord, gave to me. And I put my faith and trust in you. And because of that, I know that you're proud of me. And so, as we continue our journey through Lent, I ask us to occasionally look down at our hands. Just take a look for a second and ask, any calluses there? Are we a little beat up for the cross? Or, as my father once commented to me, he says, wow, you look like you haven't done a single day of labor outside your life. You look at my father's hands, my gosh, I mean. But let's begin to think and place ourselves in that mode of thinking, so that as we come towards the end of Lent and the beginning of Holy Week and then Easter, we approach Easter with confidence and know that we have conformed our life to what Christ was asking us to do. Amen.